Hello and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly massive geographic anomaly. We look at the modern map of the United States today and we just kind of take those massive continental borders for granted. But the transformation from a fragile smattering of East Coast colonies into a global superpower, that was absolutely not inevitable. It was the result of wild negotiations, massive demographic explosions, and honestly, some of the most astonishing real estate deals in human history. So get ready, because we're going to see exactly why America doubled in size and how that insatiable quest for space permanently changed the world. Okay, let's dive into this because the beginning of this story is a stark contrast to what the country would eventually become. Right after the American Revolution, the United States was not a powerhouse. Actually, scratch that. It was essentially a failing mess. The original 13 colonies had become 13 highly fragmented, independent acting states. They were really only united in name. They had created a government that just flat out wasn't working, and they only controlled a relatively small sliver of land over on the eastern seaboard. So the idea that this fragile new nation would suddenly and dramatically double its territory, it seemed practically impossible.
Part 1. The deal that doubled America.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer contrast in motivations that brought two massive empires to the negotiating table. By 1789, the Founding Fathers had written a new constitution, created a federal government that actually worked, and elected George Washington as their first president. But looking west, their expansion was completely blocked. Everything west of the new nation belonged to Spain. Well, that is, until Napoleon Bonaparte seized power over in France and completely redrew the global map. The United States had a very practical geographic goal. They desperately needed to use the Mississippi River to transport their goods, so they just wanted to buy New Orleans from France to secure that trade route. But Napoleon? He had a totally different set of problems. He was gearing up to invade Britain. To do that, he didn't need American land, he needed cash. He figured if he sold his American territory, he could fund his war and simultaneously ensure the Americans remained friendly to France. And Napoleon's desperate need for war funds led to one of the most astonishing offers in history. For just $15 million, the United States purchased the entire Louisiana territory. I mean, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. With this one single, bargain-priced transaction, America instantly doubled its size. They didn't just get a port city, they acquired a massive expanse of land that forever altered the trajectory of the whole nation. Part 2, moving west for space. So the crucial point is the timing of all this. Doubling the physical space of the country happened at the exact perfect moment, because the American population was doing some doubling of its own. It was growing by a factor of 2 almost every 20 years. The new nation was quite literally bursting at the seams. And to understand why, just look at this number, 7. In those days, the average American family had 7 children. Just imagine the space and resources required to sustain that kind of growth. All of those kids needed somewhere to live, they needed farmland to survive. This created an immense, almost desperate demographic explosion that forced waves and waves of people to pack up and move west in search of unclaimed land. But of course, this land wasn't truly empty. This massive westward surge brought settlers into direct contact with indigenous tribes who had been living there for generations. And it created a stark, tragic clash of perspectives. You have a settler arriving, searching for a legal deed, asking, does anyone own this land? Meanwhile, the Native American perspective is profoundly different, responding, but these are my hunting grounds. This incredible demographic explosion meant settlers were aggressively claiming massive tracts of land, which inevitably displaced the indigenous populations who relied on those very same lands to survive. Let's move on and see how this builds, because the expansion certainly didn't stop with Louisiana. In 1819, America bought Florida from Spain. Then things got really complicated down in Mexico. American settlers had moved into Texas, eventually outnumbered the locals, and broke free to form their own republic. In 1845, the U.S. allowed Texas to join the Union as a slave state. That sparked a huge border dispute and a bitter war with Mexico. By 1848, at the end of that war, the United States ended up taking control of the entire northern territory of Mexico.
Part 3. Stretching sea to sea.
During this exact same era, the U.S. also came to an agreement with Britain to just split the Oregon Territory. Through this wild combination of great luck, calculated purchases, demographic pressure, and aggressive expansion, America had stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific in just 50 years. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. The continent was conquered. The borders reached the ocean. There was officially nowhere left to expand. Unless, what does a rapidly growing nation do when it hits the water? Well, the narrative takes a playful pivot here into a rather strange and highly specific phase of American expansion, claiming overseas territories. And it started in the most bizarre way possible. Let me summarize a real historical conversation for you. An American explorer essentially calls up Uncle Sam and says, "Hey, I found an island in the middle of the ocean. Can I claim it?" Uncle Sam asks, "Well, does anyone live there?" "No." "Is it covered in bird droppings?" The explorer says, "Yes, sir." And just like that, it became U.S. soil. This was all codified in the Guano Islands Act, guano being bird droppings, which were incredibly valuable back then for fertilizer and gunpowder. And believe it or not, this law still exists today. Part 4, expanding beyond the mainland. While bird poop islands were a quirky start, the United States soon had much, much bigger global ambitions. But to achieve them, the country first had to survive a devastating internal crisis, the Civil War. After decades of arguing over the institution of slavery, the nation fractured. Ultimately, the North won, the slaves were freed, and the nation was reunited. Emerging from this crucible, the newly reunited U.S. started looking to acquire massive chunks of territory beyond its mainland. And that ambition led to another absolutely unbelievable real estate deal. The Tsar of Russia wanted to offload Alaska, so the Russian ambassador, Stoic, met with U.S. Secretary of State William Seward. Seward offered $5 million, maybe 5.5. Stoic countered with $7 million, and Seward instantly agreed. He wanted to sign the treaty that very night. You can literally just imagine Stoic whispering to himself, "Oh man, I should have asked for more money." And this brilliantly illustrates just how effectively the United States used its checkbook to build a superpower. It is a staggering historical shopping list. Think about it. The Louisiana Territory for $15 million, Northern Mexico for $15 million, plus another $10 million later for a little more land, and the massive expanse of Alaska for a mere $7 million. These were incredibly cheap, massive real estate acquisitions that fundamentally secured America's resources and geopolitical dominance. But as the U.S. grew, a really deep internal debate emerged about what kind of country it should actually be. Take Hawaii, for example. American businessmen had essentially taken control of the Hawaiian Islands and formally asked the U.S. to annex them. The president at the time initially said no, arguing that America should mind its own business, be it just nation, and not misuse its power against the weak. But the counter-argument was fierce, minding our own interests. Opponents feared that if the U.S. didn't take Hawaii, another power like Germany or Japan would swoop right in and use it as a military base against them. That whole debate over isolationism versus global intervention was violently settled in 1898. Americans heavily sympathized with Cuban revolutionaries who were fighting against the Spanish Empire. And when a U.S. warship mysteriously sank in Havana Harbor, it sparked a rapid war with Spain. The U.S. quickly won, capturing Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and officially annexing Hawaii along the way. Soon after, an energetic President Theodore Roosevelt pushed to build the Panama Canal, completing it in 1914. This engineering marvel allowed the newly powerful U.S. Navy to seamlessly move between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It completely shifted the nation's focus from just acquiring space to cementing its status as a global power. Which leaves us with this final, profound question to ponder. Should America mind its own business or its own interests? We've seen how a small, fragile string of colonies desperately searching for farmland evolved through unbelievable purchases, demographic booms, and strategic wars. What started as a simple quest for space permanently evolved into a complex quest for global power and security. It's a tension that continues to define the nation to this very day. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope you walk away with a completely new perspective on the map of the world.